proud land, we grew up strong. We were wanted all along. I was taught to fight, taught to win. I never thought I could fail. No fight left, or so it seems. I am a man whose dreams have all deserted. I've changed my face, I've changed my name, but no one wants you when you lose.
Don't give up, 'cause you have friends. Don't give up, you're not beaten yet.
Hello and welcome to the Dollhouse. My name is Kit Kowalski. I'm an Australian feminist researcher and blogger. I'm joined by my co-host, Edie Wyatt, who writes long-form essays and who we're going to be very nice to this week because she is currently suffering with a bit of a cold. We're here to talk about sex, gender, and all the nonsense. How is it going, Edie?
I'm a little bit unwell. I've developed man flu. I've
Oh,
decided
no.
that's what happens when you're middle-aged. Yeah, and your children are grown up and you've had all those years of not being able to be sick and having no sympathy and having to soldier on. I've decided that I'm going to have man flu and complain endlessly about how sick I am.
Well, yeah, good on you. I think, do you have a little bell so that your husband can go and get you things?
It's not that far, I have to tell the truth. He has been making me my dinner and looking after me. Yeah, I've done very little except watch bad television. Although some of it's been good. I've been watching those. I quite like English detective dramas. So I've been watching pretty much every detective drama ever made. Yeah.
Well, you have to make sure you get your affairs in order because we know that almost 98% of cases of man flu do not prove to be fatal. So
No,
the risks are high, yes.
Well, I have been, claiming that I'm dying, but it's probably unlikely that I'm dying. I took a COVID test. It's not COVID, so yeah.
Well, that's something, yeah.
Yeah, that's something, yeah. And my little dog has been, my faithful companion. He's getting a bit sick of my whinging as well, so I better get better soon.
Oh, God, if the dog's over it, then you've really got to get yourself together.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So we normally film on a Friday and Thursday night, don't we? But it's Friday morning here now, and we're trying to get our stuff together, and I haven't done much research, so Kit's going to be carrying me.
I'm going to try, yes, and
we do want to give a bit of content warning as well. We are going to be talking about suicide in this episode, suicide and suicidality, and it's one of the big claims that we're given in the trans movement about the link between transgenderism and suicidality. We talked about it last week with Dr. Steve-O and the claims that he made. So we don't want to be insensitive. I think both of us are very conscious of the problems with suicide. I've lost someone that I love very much who was gay and gender non-conforming to suicide. So I'll probably talk a little bit about that and the impact that it had on my family as well. So we want to try and keep it, those sensitivities fairly close. But we know that there's a trigger for people. It's a deeply emotional issue, which is why we don't think it should be weaponized against parents. So we are walking a fine line. We're trying to bring a voice of compassion as well as compassion to families as well, and realize that this can be damaging.
As well as a lot of the reading that I've done about this topic is directed at the factual claims and the basis of the factual claims that are being made in weaponizing. So yeah, suicide is a really tricky and difficult topic. And, you know, if this is something that you don't want to listen to, do sit this one out and hit us up next week. But if you can stick around, that would be fantastic. We're not going to, you know, get too deep into it. We're going to talk a lot about facts and figures and claims as well. So, yeah.
That's right, yeah. And so it's a balance. So we're going to try and hit the balance. We're grown-ups. This is I always set this YouTube for above 18. I'm assuming that everyone who's watching is an adult. So we're going to talk about things like grown-up women.
That's right. And that is something that when we're thinking about the figures and we're thinking about, you know, the numbers, and you might say, well, it's 2 or it's 4 or it's, you know, these are all individual people, and you know, it can be easy to lose sight of that. You know, when you're thinking about numbers, and especially when they are very low numbers, which is what we find out, that still is a tragedy. And I guess I want to just say that up front is, you know, just because the claims that are being made here are quite overinflated, that doesn't mean that the pain that some of these young people are going through is any less real, and it doesn't mean that that it's any less of a tragedy that an individual takes their own life, which I would recognise it is. It's always a tragedy. Yeah.
And there's a cruelty as well in using this idea, because it's not only cruelty to parents, but children. Life is really hard. You know, it's a struggle, and it's a struggle for everyone. It's especially a struggle if you feel socially isolated. It's especially a struggle if you have characteristics in yourself that you can't help that make you socially isolated. But it's cruel to tell children that there's a solution to the problem that is not real, or that isn't backed by scientific evidence, or isn't. It's not realistic. So we want to tackle that issue as well. And out of kindness, I think both of us came into this issue. I certainly did. I don't want to speak for Kit, but you know, it was a sexual abuse issue that really brought me into this, because I thought, you know, it's not kind to be saying to those young girls. I was that girl. I was that girl who was homeless, who'd been made homeless by my home being unsafe. And it was a struggle. From that position to build a life is really hard, and some people just don't make it.
Yeah. And
if you're in that position where you feel like you're not making it, if it's just all too much, it can be easy to grasp onto a solution that is not quite right, you know. I joined the church, and some people think that's a crazy thing to do, but it was really good for me. It really helped me. So, you know, we're trying. I'm trying to say we're mindful that that, you know,
we really are mindful, and like puberty is hell. Puberty is hard. Puberty is hell, and when you're also vulnerable, there's no. I'm speaking now, like you know, as someone who had a really difficult time in their teenage years. You know, you do think, oh my God, there's no end to this. My life's going to be terrible forever.
Yeah.
But now, speaking as a parent, I can't imagine what would happen to me. Just the idea that something that my children could be taken away from me, it's almost physically painful. This idea. So I can't imagine how hurtful it would be if you're a parent and you're living day to day with this spectre that your child is saying to you, oh, I'm going to kill myself, or this is the natural path for me.
Yeah.
Or the doctors are saying this to you, and they're saying it to your children. All right, so shall we get on to
speaking of doctors?
Speaking of doctors, yes. We had the very very brave and wonderful and very clever Jillian Spencer, who is a child psychiatrist at the late of the Queensland Gender Clinic. She was recently suspended, is that right?
Yeah, she was a senior psychiatrist at the Children's Hospital here in South Brisbane, and has been having concerns for some time. She raised those concerns. I think she was consistently raising those concerns up until the point where she was suspended from duty. She spoke yesterday at New South Wales Parliament. Where was this event? Was run by Binary, wasn't it?
It was, I believe, run by Binary, which is our friend Kimberly Smith.
And we heard from 6 or 7 women. Sorry, I can't remember. I should have been better prepared, but I did mention I was sick. We heard from Sal Grover. We heard from Kimberly and Jasmine Sussex, who we've had on this program. And we heard from Angie Jones. She did really well, I thought. And she looked great. She looked like a bit of a rock star there, Angie. She looked very attractive, and she got her words together really well. And all the women did great. But I'll play...
Actually, there was a bit of argy-bargy as well in the chamber. There were some trans activists, and there was this great video clip circulating on Twitter where these women are sort of standing up and having a bit of a stoush, and then there's an older gentleman sort of shuffling past with a cup of tea on a saucer, and he's just kind of going past them trying to get a seat. He's got his biscuit and his tea.
He's seen it all before.
He's like, oh yeah, whatever.
You rat bags.
I mean, Anyway, please play on.
Young girls. Okay, all right. I'll play just a little snippet of what Jillian said.
We didn't label children with long-term conditions, such as personality disorders, because we knew that a lot of conditions would ease with maturity. And indeed, the 11 studies that were conducted before the affirmation model was in use, when they used a watchful waiting approach, found that 60 to 90% of children with gender dysphoria became comfortable in their own bodies with maturity. I assure you that this is not part of a culture war. This is a really serious child protection issue. We entered our field to try to assist children to thrive, but the gender clinics have been set up and psychiatrists are being forced to affirm the social transition of all children and go along with the idea that puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones will lead to benefit. We are not being allowed any professional discretion as to whether that is the right approach. It is incredibly distressing to be forced into harming other people's children or otherwise face potential loss of one's career, livelihood, or to be cast out of the workplace, as has happened to me. But this is too important, so I will not be silenced, and I wish to call for an urgent federal inquiry into the model of care for the treatment of children with gender dysphoria.
Round of applause, name. Yeah.
Nice one, Jillian. Thank you so much. Now, actually, yesterday there was, in the federal parliament, there was a discussion in the Senate about whether or not we should have an inquiry into children's gender medicine. I believe that this was brought by Senator Hanson, and they were out of time before a vote could be taken on that discussion in the federal parliament. So there's a lot of moves, a lot of movement afoot, which is fantastic. A lot more politicians are becoming made aware of the issue.
Yeah.
And women are stepping up and women are being really, really brave.
Yeah. Because they're threatening us with these kids, right? They're saying, don't speak because you'll harm trans children. And that's the first thing that when I first came into the field, and I think many of us said the same thing. I wrote a article in Quillette, and I think it was a very raw and sensitive piece of work from my perspective. When you write something about your own experience, it costs you something, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to go and tell the whole world that I'd been sexually abused. It's not something that you want to talk about. But I wanted to speak on behalf of those children who were vulnerable. And people started to say that I was killing trans kids. That's what they said to me. And I thought, I don't think I am, you know. So that's what's being used. Parents are being told that you either have a live daughter or a dead son. You know, this is a narrative that's being used. And at the basis, I think there is a truth. And I think the truth that they're talking about is the way that boys and men bully gender non-conforming boys, and that those boys statistically, originally this was the claim with gay marriage, because suicide skews male, right? That's just it's one of the realities of suicide. It's very established in research. That these boys are very sensitive. I talked last week about Leonard, who was a boy at our school who was very, very gender non-conforming, and wasn't really welcome in the company of the boys. So he was kind of pushed into the girls' sphere. He's told he's a girl. I think I've spoken to, a lot of gay men over the years. Many of them would have been, is there a gay man that hasn't been called a girl or a woman? As an insult. And so they get pushed, and there's mental health costs to that. And it's very real. There is a very real impact. There's a very real link between childhood bullying and suicidality. That's true. We have to be, but then to weaponize that in this other kind of field is where I become extremely uncomfortable. And it becomes very difficult to talk about, because we get these kids put in front of us again, and you often see them on the TV and they show you the trans child, and it's often a very beautiful little boy that's got the long hair, and we've all known that little kid that's a little bit more sensitive, and we all want to protect, all the mothers want to protect that little boy. Yeah, I think that's the truth of it. There is a truth in it, but it's weaponized, and it's used in a very sinister way, I think.
It's if we look at it's a very common trope. I remember pulling out some videos to put onto my blog some time ago. And they were clips from American parents. And there was one who was Kimberly Shapley, who's the mother of Kai Shapley there. Kai was an actor and an activist, like a child, basically. And she says that she was a conservative Christian mother who, thinks that all gay people are going to hell. And then she has a little boy who wants to have long hair and wear dresses and makeup and rings. And she bullies him and she beats him, and she tries home gay conversion therapy on a tiny little child.
Yeah. And the father was rejecting him as well, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
Him for not said he can't go and play out unless he puts boys' clothes on, stuff like that.
Yeah, and we find that, often the mother will kind of be the savior in this scenario. But like we see with Jazz Jennings, the mother is very much the driver of the transing, because they're trying to save the child from being homosexual, and all that entails, what they see as being the horrible life of being a homosexual.
Can't bear the thought of themselves.
And
just let the kid wear the dress.
Let the kid wear the dress.
And
right?
make that normal.
But even in Australia, we saw that Australian Story did a documentary called About a Girl, about Georgie Stone and his parents, his family. Now, interestingly enough, again, the mother is the one who is driving it, Rebecca Robertson. And, they come from this really liberal, theatrical, arty kind of family. And you can't imagine that it's that really overt homophobia that's driving it. But at the same time, there is this real sense of wanting to protect the child. And there's pictures of him as a younger boy, and he's so pretty. He's like beautiful long golden hair and wearing a princess dress, looking a lot like a little girl. Before puberty, obviously. And there is that sense of, we have to protect this child from whatever horrible things are out there in the world, and it becomes urgent to protect the child.
Because we were going to expand the gender meanings. That when I did what was called women's studies at the time, what we were going to do, and by that stage I had recently lost my cousin, and so I was very aware of the kind of damage that our society. This is the use of a societal reengineering to address a problem, and I'm not against it. Because we were going to expand the gender meanings. We were going to let little girls be a bit tomboyish, which we were already, and then, grow into masculine women. That was okay. And we were going to do the same to boys, that they could be a bit feminine and grow into feminine men. How we then started to use that as a diagnostic criteria for them to be literally girls and sterilize them and castrate them, that was the step where I thought, oh, shit.
Yeah, same. I mean, remember the 90s, remember the 90s where everybody was like, there was that idea of like genderqueer or gender trouble, there was that idea that, say, academics like Camille Paglia would popularize, and she used to call herself transgender in the sense that and I think she just sort of means she's like a lady who wears pants. Like she doesn't want to be feminine and she doesn't want to be masculine. She wants to be trans, the genders.
Yeah. And be accepted in traditionally masculine kind of fields as well. You and I both got interested in politics. We both like to look at data. When I first started to work for the government, I worked in data. I loved it. Most of the guys in data, people in data, were blokes. All the guys that taught me about data analysis were men.
And you have to go a little bit into the masculine gender in order to fit into that world.
You have to put away the emotional, which is what we're trying to balance out now.
Yeah.
You're more analytical. I'm more, let's talk about our feelings. And
so look, what's happened is that this has been, and I think it really comes down to a driver in, I can't say it really comes down to, but part of what it comes down to is that there's a real confusion in the centers of knowledge production in our society, and there's a confusion between knowledge and content. Right. So we're producing content, we're producing, the grievance studies, we're producing a lot of research, and it's not necessarily new knowledge. but we're changing all the words around and we're pretending that it's this new knowledge, but it's just content. So one of the things that's happened is that now instead of being beyond gender, meaning we're not going to mind so much if you're a lady who wears pants, we're actually cementing this idea that if you wear a dress, then you're a lady, and if you wear pants, you're a gentleman.
Yeah, it's a diagnostic criteria for sex, right?
It's that really simplistic looking at the yin and the yang and saying there's a mix, forgetting the fact that we all have the masculine and the feminine energies in different balances. And it's just a way of grouping them together.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a really dogmatic way of looking at masculine and feminine.
Yeah.
And saying if you have
vernacular too, isn't it? It's very, there is a common cultural understanding about things which can be influenced by media and information and government strategy. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
So I think what we're finding is that we're producing all of this content and we're calling it knowledge. We have decided that there is such a thing as being transgender and that it's innate. And obviously, because it's innate, then there must be children that have this condition. Yes. And so we've gone looking for this condition in children.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, it has been found. There are children that are gender non-conforming.
Yeah.
And there are statistics out there that back up the claim that if these children aren't allowed to transition, then they will self-harm. Now, this is what we're going to look at in a little bit more detail, is this claim. First up, I think we want to play a little bit of a clip from an ACON training session. So this is the AIDS Council of New South Wales, ACON, their workplace diversity and inclusion unit called Pride and Diversity. They conduct workplace trainings where they go out there into private companies and into the government and talk to people who are setting our government policy about the issues around homosexuality, inclusion, and transgender and inclusion. And this is what they have to say about transgender children.
The fact that you can change that. So we've had some really, really awful statistics about, depression and about high rates of suicide. And then we're saying we can change that. And we can change that pretty easily, actually. We can change that by strong levels of social support in our homes, in our families, in our schools, but also in our workplaces. And a really, really simple thing for us to do, which is use somebody's name and use somebody's pronoun properly. Their affirmed name and pronoun can significantly improve health outcomes for people. And this is things we can do. We can do these as an organisation. If someone comes to us in our organisation and says, I want to affirm my gender in the workplace, we should be able to do this. We should be able to support somebody to have their name changed, their gender marker changed, and have their colleagues actually use their correct name. And we as individuals can do this. So I think the key takeout for this slide is the one that actually those really appalling statistics are completely changeable if we know and if we do the right things. So all comfortable with this slide? Apart from the fact that you can't.
No, we're not comfortable, actually.
No, we're not.
Not comfortable.
So she actually brings out this statistic in the beginning that's 48% of trans youth have attempted suicide. Now, this is a statistic that we see repeated around the world. We've seen Jazz Jennings talk about it on I Am Jazz. This is a really common statistic. And then she says that the solution is simply to put in place policies and procedures that force ideological compliance with somebody else's affirmed identity. So it sounds pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
Children are killing themselves or attempting to kill themselves.
And we can 100% fix it.
We can 100% fix it. But all you have to do
Strange
is put in
claim.
place policies and procedures that force people in the workplace to use ideological language.
Yeah, if you do everything we say, these are the kids and their blood's on your hands.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what offended me originally with the same-sex marriage debate. I was saying, oh, hang on, let's talk about this, because marriage is really important to us, you know, and I was worried about all the things about compelling churches to agree to things that are against their religion, that sort of thing. Oh, you're killing gay people. And the fact that they were putting the blood of my cousin on my own hands really offended me. I mean, I'm hard to offend now, but back then it was right at the beginning, and I thought, hang on, let's be sensible about this. I agree with the principle. I agree that we shouldn't bully the shit out of feminine boys and victimize masculine girls, you know. But what they're saying is that those kids now, they're calling them trans kids. So they're putting those gay kids on a pathway. They're forcing us with the suicide of people on a pathway. So let's have a look at these statistics and see. I mean, can we do that? Is that transphobic?
And so what we actually find is that, so ACON are going into workplaces and they're saying, right, children are trying to kill themselves. So they're going to workplaces like the ABC, for example, and they're giving this message to the journalists who work at the ABC. And I will put in the show notes a program from Radio National that came out in, I think it's 2019. And this would have been right at the beginning of the ABC's journey with ACON and becoming a gold star employer with ACON. And this radio program, it's literally talks, it actually literally says they're setting out to bust some myths around trans children.
Wouldn't that be nice?
And it discusses the source of this 48% statistic, which is the Telethon Health Transpathways study. So we'll go into that a little bit more later. But for now, we're going to have a look at other ways that ACON are bringing up the topic of suicide. So we have Trans Health Research, which is a research arm in Melbourne University. One of the lead researchers is Dr. Ada Chung, who is a known activist endocrinologist. And she's, so Trans Health Research, they've got together with some researchers, including Mr. Teddy Cook, who is the Director of Trans Health Equity at ACON.
We've got a picture here of Teddy Cook clutching her pearls. I thought that was important to put in.
It's a very, very female looking sort of pose.
It's a pearl clutching pose completely, isn't it?
And our Teddy again is an activist through and through.
Yeah.
So when we look at accepting research from people who have this particular ideological bent, it's so important to look at where they've come from and what it is that actually colors the findings or the scope of the studies that they're doing. So Teddy has been a transgender activist and has been seeking to naturalize trans people as their assumed sex for a long time now. She's one of the founders of Grunt.
She also respectively identifies herself as a trans child.
Yes.
So she'll come up and say, I was a trans child. There was a little clip there that we didn't put in. I might be the only transgender person you speak to today. I am the trans voice is basically what she is saying. Teddy also has an identical twin. who is not trans.
That's correct, yes.
So in terms of a scientific study, we assume that trans soul is not genetic.
Well,
because identical twins are identical genetically, are they not?
yeah. So Teddy's actually a really interesting sort of case because she has, I've heard her before giving a talk where she talks about herself and her twin as young teens, and she described herself as a lesbian. She described herself as a budding lesbian, and then even now, and I've also seen articles where she's described herself as a trans man who has a female partner, but part of her identity as a trans man is actually having gay sex in gay sex venues like saunas.
Yeah.
And so she has described herself as a trans man with a female partner who goes and has gay sex outside of the relationship. And it's part of his identity that she holds as a gay man.
And part of the thing with Grunt, we did a dive into Grunt, which is a website that she developed, is to affirm, part of the purpose of that is to affirm trans-identified females with the infrastructure that gay men have built to I'd like to say date or meet or
to meet,
be together. Let's say be together in their own company.
That's very coy. Yeah,
that's right. Without one of the things that Dennis Kavanagh has said is that gay spaces for men are a refuge from heterosexual society. Now, I don't know anything about that because I'm not gay. I've got no desire to go into a gay space. I never have. I'm more than happy to have gay men have a space and have a right to have their own gay space. The problem for me is that when they go into that and they bring those gay men into a game where they're affirming the identity, and if you don't affirm that identity, they're going to kill themselves. This is a very problematic narrative, and it becomes authoritarian. It's become useful to the state. I know I keep saying that, but it is useful because it levels everything out. It says, all right, this is what we're going to do. Suck it up. This is what we're going to do. If you don't do it, trans people are going to kill themselves. This is the solution. It's much easier than trying to say to boys, don't bully these kids, and say to men, don't push these people out of your spaces. They're men. It's actually deeply homophobic. Yeah. It's a state solution to it's a simplistic state solution to a very complex problem. And, I'm not even saying that my own cousin who committed suicide did it because he was gay. I used to say that as a young woman. I used to say, oh, yeah, society killed him because I was young and I was politically active and it was all for gay rights. But really, it was very complex, people who take their own lives do so in a myriad of complexity. And men seem to do it more often than women.
Yeah, so that it is something to be really mindful about. Neither of us are experts in suicide.
No.
But what I will say is just a concerned individual is that life does find a way. People can find ways to live with all kinds of things and all kinds of lifestyles, and there are all kinds of communities out there where people have found a way to live with things. I mean, there are furries, for God's sakes. There are people who are living with all sorts of difficult and weird desires. But if people are fundamentally feel rejected by everybody, if they can't find any safe harbor, then it really closes off a lot of avenues.
And shutting down discussion also.
Yeah.
the idea that young people who are gender non-conforming can't handle to hear what other people are saying, and if they do hear it, it's a very problematic model for the prevention of suicide. Is to compel women to accept males in their spaces. It's just not, and to compel men, gay men, to have female-bodied people in their spaces.
And that's really what it comes down to. Say for Nikki, the ACON trainer, there's this terrible problem, and you have the solution, and it's a tiny, tiny, tiny price for you to pay. So why don't you just pay it?
Yeah.
And so, and if that was really the bargain, I'm sure that we would all just go, sure, that's fine, we'll play along. Most of us have played along with something at some point in our lives for the sake of, a lot of social norms. Like, I used to work with someone who had a really big disfigurement on his face. And it was quite noticeable, and none of us really paid any attention to it. And then one day he was saying he was going to the doctor, and he said, "You might not have noticed, but I have this thing." It's like, we all noticed, we just don't point it out because there's no,
he knows you're pretending to not notice,
right?
But, and that's a joke.
It's it's one of those things. Like we play along, we get along in society, and most of us decent people do it as a matter of course. We don't point out someone's shortcomings, we don't point out what's wrong with them.
No. And we all perform. We all put on clothes and make a performance. We go to school for 12 years, for God's sake. Wear a gold bloody uniform every single day of our life. And we all have to perform. It's part of being a grown-up. Now I just want to read what
Teddy's saying
here. I've got this quote here from Teddy. If you care about suicide prevention, you need to care about trans people. To all those people in the room who are decision makers, please provide more funding to LGBTI community-led organisations. If you're in a position where you are teaching or training up and coming mental health professionals, I urge you to advocate for the inclusion of trans health in universities. And if you are part of a mainstream service, I urge you to advocate for better training to how to better support trans people so they feel safe to access your services. So what they're asking for is not just, let's not look at the guy who's got dysphoria. They're asking for complete, huge amounts of money
and resources, right?
That's
they
right,
want
and
curriculum
their
time.
salary. This woman's on a big chunk of money. She's part of a massive grift. I mean, that's a judgment I'm making right there. But this whole thing is an industry. And it depends on compliance of the population, which the government are happy to pay them for. If you can get people to shut the fuck up in their workplaces and be compliant, then good on you. Let's not talk about right now the consequences of the mental health of some people in these workplaces who are forced into this nonsense and who have to.
Yeah, I've got to say, my mental health took a massive dive when I discovered that there were things I wasn't supposed to be saying in the workplace.
Yeah.
And I accidentally said the wrong thing. And, it's awful to have to feel like you're walking on eggshells and you don't know who you can trust to say the sky is blue.
Yeah. Are we allowed to say that?
Are we allowed to say that?
Some of it's okay, like they pretend it's like it was with sexual harassment. Oh, we can't even pitch a woman on the arse anymore.
Oh God, it's terrible.
This is not that. This is not that reactionary. Oh, these bloody women, they want to be called Ms. It's all ridiculous. This is not that. This is not just, I think talking about Camille Palia, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things she did say about Ms. is that it took years. I mean, to get Ms. into the vernacular where women could have a title that wasn't identifying whether they're married or not, took years and years.
And there was a need for it.
There was a need for it. There is. I use Ms.
Yeah, me too.
All the time, because it's none of their business if I'm married or not. It's probably a giveaway when that says, Mr. and Ms. But I don't care if people. I'm not trying to hide that I'm married. But it's a very useful thing. But it took decades to get that one thing.
And because it is about the status of women, it is about there was actually a need for it because there was no other status.
No.
Whereas if you contrast that with mix or MX or calling Teddy Cook Mr., which she does sort of put that forward constantly, Mr. Teddy Cook. There's no real need for that.
No.
There's it's not helpful. It's not always helpful to obscure whether or not someone's male or female.
No.
Sometimes it is, like say with recruitment. I think it is also usually pretty important to make sure that we have gender blind recruitment. But it's you just leave your title off, right? When that's important, when that's actually important.
And we reinforce it, employers. We have legislation as well.
Yeah, we do.
It doesn't always work, but the legislation to say that you can't discriminate between a man and a woman of equal qualifications, So
I've got our next article here as well. So I just, Teddy Cook has gone to this conference to spotlight trans suicidality and has, asked for a bit of money while we're at it.
And compliance. All they want is money and compliance.
Yeah. All we want is everything that you've got.
Yeah, that's right.
And so that was ACON and Trans Health Research. And then we have another article which is featured on the University of Melbourne website. And it's actually called Why Have Nearly Half of Transgender Australians Attempted Suicide? By Dr. Ada Chung, the activist endocrinologist, and Zav Zwicky, who presented at that same conference with Teddy Cook. So again, it's utterly irresponsible to promote this narrative. It's utterly irresponsible.
And it's an unable to be verified claim under self-ID, particularly. Now we've got self-ID in Queensland. So I used to say I don't know what a trans person is because the idea of trans has expanded so grossly. And we might have said that it was, like my mate at school, who was the gender non-conforming gay guy, which was almost always the case. But now we have self-ID. So my government are now expecting me to accept anyone in an intimate space public space where my children and I are, my daughters, who declares themselves to be a woman. That's the only thing. And that is evidenced, according to the legislation, by things like clothes. The most authoritative thing is a declaration. And the declaration, particularly of a man to say he's a woman, has complete authority now in all the infrastructure that is designed to protect female bodies in the state I live in. So that how could they justify that everyone who makes that declaration, half of them have attempted suicide? I call bullshit. I hate to be insensitive, but I call bullshit.
Well, the first thing we always have to look at with these studies is you have to look at who they studied, right? So they've got almost 1,000 individuals, so 928 participants, but they were recruited using an anonymous community survey, right? So There's nothing saying that people didn't answer the survey more than once, or that they didn't do what we do. You know, someone puts it onto Facebook or onto one of the groups that we're on and says, hey, everybody, you know, come and make your voice heard. And they used a non-probability snowball sampling approach, right? So using an online survey platform. So that is where they published it on Facebook, and then they asked people to share the study with their friends. So they've gone to people who are likely to give them the kind of answers that that they want to hear. And so again, just having a think about this survey, 37% reported to be female, 36% reported to be male, and 27% reported to be non-binary gender identities. They're not even collecting sex data.
So we don't have any sex.
We don't have any sex data.
In a suicide study.
Yeah.
Which we all know.
We all know.
Is sex is incredibly important. Sex and age particularly are very important.
And so this is like the more up-to-date study, but the one that has been in use in Australia for a long time. The study that changed the game in Australia was called the Telethon Kids Institute Transpathway Study, and that came out in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. So this was the first survey of mental health amongst trans kids in Australia. And if we look, it's actually referenced in all sorts of sources, including the Royal Children's Hospital Gender Clinic standards of care for gender diverse children.
I think Stathis referenced it last week. In that thing, I watched the whole thing. He did reference a study. I thought he said it was from 2017, but I could be wrong.
It absolutely is. Like this is the place where we get the almost half of trans kids have thought about suicide or have attempted suicide. And I'll just say, even the way that is reported is so important. So there's a huge difference between thinking about suicide as a solution to your problems. That's having thoughts that are in your head, and they're very dark and they're very unpleasant. And, you know, we don't want that. But it's well recognized by clinicians that it is a far cry from making a plan, getting whatever you need together and picking a date and then attempting and actually going through with that plan.
Yeah.
And failing to carry out that plan. That's what we're talking about here. It's a very different thing.
Yeah, the study that I read last night about the link between bullying and suicidality had a couple of different categories. One was suicide ideation. The other one was suicide behavior.
Yeah.
So when you started to actually act on suicidal behavior, you started to act on these things. Yeah, one of those things might be that you check yourself into a mental health facility, which I know that, you know, maybe that's one of the reasons women's suicide is a bit less. My family have always, you know, have that disease, and so I've had a lot of suicide threats in my life. My sister used to ring me when she had overdosed or something, and I would call the ambulance. Towards the end of when things were very stressful with her, mentally ill people can be very manipulative, and when you've got small children, it's, you know, and you run a business, which I did, and you've got a lot in your life. Sometimes I remember one day she called me, she told me she'd overdosed. I called the ambulance, and then I went and had a shower. and they called me, when you call an ambulance, they'll call you, tell you what hospital they're going to. And you think, oh, right, there's other, and then I had a kids event to go to, and I remember thinking, but I knew she hadn't taken enough.
Yeah.
I knew she was struggling, that she wanted to give me a bit of a hard time. And it's a terrible thing, but that would be the behaviors. She would often call the ambulance herself if she was attempting suicide, or if she was planning to attempt suicide, which is a very sensible thing to do. A lot of people who are suicidal do make sensible choices in terms of saying, look, this is not, I need some help here.
And that's often what it is. It's saying I've gone beyond my breaking point and I need help. I need assistance, and I'm so desperate that I need something. I need other people to come in and lift me up.
That's right. Recognizing, and there's some of that's what they talk about, that when you start to analyze your own thoughts, like reflective stuff. I remember once when I was postnatal, I had postnatal depression. My parents had died when I was pregnant with my daughter. And so I was aware that could be, a problem. And so I remember keep monitoring mindfulness, the way my thoughts were tracking and how they were leading. It's a practice that is often used. There's many things, that we can talk about with suicide prevention, and that's another cost. If we're going to hijack the discussion on suicide with just this one thing, we have to wonder what their motive is. Maybe their motives are not as pure as they could be.
So if we look at this Transpathway Summary, so again, this is children. They recruited in a similar way. They put out the call on Facebook and other kinds of groups like that. So again, it's anonymous. They did also have a parents study, which had a much lower response rate. But they're looking at 859 young people, but the age ranges go up to, they're between 12 and 24, which are 12 and 25, actually.
A strange cohort, isn't it?
It is a bit of a strange cohort. So it's 25 is not really children. It's not really what I'd think of as children.
No.
Young people, I'd probably still class them as young people, but I wouldn't say children. And
the suicidality in that cohort,
it's very different.
Would skew male, I would think. Because I know my cousin, when he committed suicide, was 25. And I remember looking at the statistics, and that was kind of the older kind of range among young men.
Well, if you sort of think about like life journeys, if you've got someone who is, say, they get an apprenticeship when they're 15 or 16, 4-year apprenticeship, they're finished by the time they're 20, they're establishing themselves in their business. And by the time they're 25, they know kind of what their life course is going to be. They might even be a parent by that stage.
And often problems
right?
go. Isn't there a mental thing when you're 25? Like it's kind of...
You're reaching that maturity.
It's a finishing of the maturity into adulthood, in terms of, being a bit more sensible. 12 is not even a teenager.
12 not even a teenager.
So the kind of, I always say to parents of teenagers, the amount of hormones that are required to turn that child into a girl into a man, a woman, or a boy into a man, are massive. What's going into that system is massive. I mean, we can all say teenage years are hell, but it's a miracle, really, isn't it? Isn't it amazing? And when you've had a teenager, it's much more fun to watch than it is to experience.
Well, you've had 2 teenage girls,
and
they've come out the other side both of them.
I have, and you're on the
I'm in the beginning.
yeah.
And, I think that for me, the most important thing for me is to show my children where the guardrails are, like to kind of give them some space, but to show them, okay, no, that's beyond the acceptable behavior. And I realize that your emotions are everywhere, and I realize that you're angry and you're sad and you're happy and you're angry and you're sad and you're happy. But, you've got to manage that, and you've got to learn. You're learning to manage.
They need to know the rules too. Kids really need to know. My daughter went from a very strict private school to a much more liberal sort of school when she was in grade 10. And we went to the presentation, and she said, I need to know what the rules are. She loved the rules. We used to call them cases, because she brought the law. Loved the rules. Was a person who needed to know what they were. Other kids, my other daughter was very kind of, she used to mock some of the ceremonies they had at the private school. She thought it was all a bit of a joke. Probably, a bit more like me in that sense. But, kids do like boundaries. And, but by the time you're 25, you're supposed to be able to self-regulate. You're supposed to be able to make your own life, realize what the rules of society are, and start making your own way.
And even if you haven't had a trade, you've gone to university, maybe by the time you're sort of 18 or so, you're starting a 3 or 4 year degree. By the time you should have graduated, and again, you should be at the beginning of your career by the time you're 25. You're much more of an adult, and you probably have lived out of home for a few years by that stage. Like to class them in with children is a bit much.
Yeah, it's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. None of this makes any sense.
So, just one of the things that really struck me. I've read this study on multiple occasions, and I've been struggling to really write about it because of all of the problems I see with interpreting this data. 74.4% of the respondents were female. That is assigned female at birth. They did collect birth sex. So only 25.6% were male. So the overwhelming cohort are females, for one thing. And on the slide just beforehand, if you go back, there's a pie chart that shows the breakdown of the gender identities. So we can see that the non-binary gender identity is the biggest slice of the pie. So almost 50% of these kids, they're calling themselves trans, but they're actually identifying as non-binary, as gender fluid, as genderqueer,
this is kind of a landmark study, is it?
It is a landmark study.
University of Melbourne. Is this the one that used by?
This is actually used by the Royal Children's Hospital Gender Clinic, and this is widely touted as a landmark study. And they published a little word cloud of all the gender identities, and it's non-binary, it's agender, it's gender fluid, genderqueer, genderqueer, gender fluid. So it's kids who are playing with language.
So they're probably autistic girls that are in a club,
and
that's weird.
Part of me reads this and I feel like I'm transported back to when I was this age, and I was like, maybe I'm this and maybe I'm that, and maybe I'll fit into this mold. And
trying to figure the world out, aren't you?
Right? Yeah,
I was always trying to
figure
the world out. I was always trying. That's why I took sociology or politics, whatever I took, humanities.
Yeah.
Because I thought, how did we end up like this? All the things. And we had all the ridiculous theories, but even before the internet, we used to make up ideas about things.
And and so there's the man gender identity, or the trans men or males, are only 30%, and what's expected, right?
You
Because
said the actual
no,
assigned male at birth was 25%, yeah?
that's right, yeah.
So they're mostly girls.
So there are some of them. So it's really confused, right? It's not as clear cut as we'd like to imagine. This is not actually studying those very few rare children who grow up, and they're boys who grow up wearing dresses. This is not studying those children. This is studying teenagers who are trying to experiment in how the world works.
And it's not a case study on actual. We'll have some statistics on actual suicide later, yeah.
Yeah, we will. And so
and they're more difficult to talk about. This stuff is just theory. When you talk about the reality of suicide, that's what we have a content warning on, because it's fucking brutal. It's horrific that people, murder themselves because they can't bear this world.
Yeah. It's not the same as learning to live an unpopular life.
No, and because kids are slashing their wrists or they're cutting themselves, or we've known those girls. They're in trouble. Those girls are in trouble, and we need to help them. And these are not the people to help them. This is my argument. It's not that I don't want them helped. I just think these people are fucking idiots, and I don't think they're going to help them. That's my. If we can get someone on this program to take Dr. Stathis wants to come on this program and convince me otherwise, then that's great. But that's my view.
Yes. And if we even look, this whole study, the way it's presented, there's a lot of isolated statistics, and there's a lot of very emotive stories. If you go to the next slide, I've actually amalgamated some of the rates of the different comorbidities that are being reported by this sample. So we're talking about 80% of those sampled in the study have ever self-harmed, 48% have ever attempted suicide. And again, this is the self-reporting. So it's really important to kind of take that with, the understanding that they're not clinicians who are classifying this according to the strict criteria. But also
stats on the sexual abuse statistics of these girls. I hate to bring out my old bandwagon, but do we know how many of these girls? Because it's got here diagnosed PTSD, which is above 20.
Yeah, it does.
A kid who's been diagnosed PTSD, a girl particularly, one would think that there might be sexual trauma, or there's a trauma element there.
I'm actually just looking at that page in the study right now, and it does say that 24.8% have experienced physical abuse in their family. 7.5% experienced sexual abuse in their family, and 57.9% experienced other abuse within their family, like neglect or verbal abuse.
It's not a lot, is it? You would think that's lower than normal.
Well, then it also classifies them outside the family as well. So 24.3% have experienced sexual abuse outside of the family. So
that doesn't align with.
So again,
aggregate data, does it?
This is the self-reporting nature of this, and I don't know about you, but I don't know how old you would have been before you would be willing to put that onto an internet form, or when you came to terms with it. Like, that's something we really have to take into account, is that these are not thoughtful clinicians who are taking this data. This is people who are deciding to tick the box or not.
I didn't call the police until I was about 33. So
there you go.
It's a long time, and this is not going to be solved. The trauma that I experienced it's not going to be solved by someone like Teddy Cook. It's not going to be solved by going into a workplace where they compel people to pretend that men are women. It's not. And the trauma that I carry is very common. When I went to the police, I dealt with about 3 police people, and they all said to me, "You wouldn't believe how common this is." I did, of course. Yeah. But you know, let's talk about some statistically. I'm in favor of looking at statistics, trying to make the world better for people who carry trauma, and who struggle with whatever they've got. But on the basis of aggregate statistics, I'm still an intelligent human being.
Well, the way that they've actually presented these statistics it's very misleading, because it absolutely erases sex from the equation. So even this, it says 24.3% of trans young people have experienced sexual abuse outside of their family. So we know that it's not trans young people who are being targeted. We know that according to the doctrine, being transgender is an internal feeling that can't be detected by others. So there's no way that a predator is targeting you on the basis of you having an internal feeling. There's no way that these people are experiencing a higher rate of abuse because they're transgender. And calling them transgender, we're saying it's 24% of trans youth. It erases the sex differences, and we know that girls are more vulnerable.
Yeah, and boys are more vulnerable to suicide.
And we know that so they've collected all of these statistics. So they've got 70-something% have ever been diagnosed with depression or with anxiety. 20-something% have been diagnosed with an eating disorder. 20-something% have been diagnosed PTSD. They're collecting all of these statistics, and then they're saying that the cause of these, the root cause, has something to do with their transgender soul. And then they're confusing cause and effect.
Well, more precisely, they're saying it's to do with the way society reacts to the transgender soul, the way that people around that person react, and how they isolate and abuse that person, and how that person is subject to the bullying of society because of that soul. It's a long bow.
How exactly? It doesn't make any sense at all to say. I mean, it would make as much sense to say that having an being transgender is caused by having the eating disorder. That the eating disorder led to that feeling of distress in the body, that led to thinking that they might be in the wrong body, their wrong sex body. It makes as much sense. Whereas what we probably know is that there is some distress or trauma or trigger that is causing all of those maladaptive behaviors. But the way that the study presents is that there is one fixed aspect, one fixed dimension, and that is their trans identity, and that's innate. It can't be changed, and it's something that is causing all of these other things to happen to these children. And what we really need to do is we need to treat them better, and we need to use their pronouns. And it's a very simple thing to use everybody's pronouns and to treat them the way they want to be treated. And all of these disorders will go away.
Yeah.
That's the story that we're being told.
Yeah, they're being killed by society.
Whereas if if this was real, and if I could prevent an eating disorder by going along and calling a boy a girl, I'm sure I would do it. If I believed it for 1 second that it was possible, I'm sure we would all make that bargain.
And why wouldn't you believe it when all these professionals, are standing up and saying, this is what it is? And what interest would they have? Which is what I started. These questions are very dangerous, because once you start asking them and looking for answers, you do find them. And they're not the answers they want you to find.
Now,
because they're very cynical. This is very, very cynical, this whole thing.
Could you imagine going into a clinic with your child and saying, my child is starving themselves, and they're a girl who thinks they're a boy, and they want to go on testosterone, and they want to have a mastectomy, and I'm really worried that before we get to any of that, they're going to cause themselves serious damage because they're not eating. Imagine going to a mental health service and saying that, and the answer is, right, we've got to get your child onto testosterone as soon as possible. Don't worry about the eating disorder. That's only being caused because you're not accepting their trans identity. All we're going to do is we're going to treat the trans identity. We're not going to treat the eating disorder.
Yeah, it's fucked up.
Can you imagine? That is actually happening.
Yeah.
That is how clinicians are prioritizing these very serious diseases.
And it's political. I mean, when I started to analyze it, it's activists that are pushing for it, and they're being embraced by the government because they're providing useful tools to the government to provide simple solutions to complex problems. Government love a simple solution to a complex problem. I mean, I don't want to talk about Indigenous people, but they're too late. But they're in real trouble. And one of the mythologies, I've been thinking about that as well, because I've been thinking about that time when I was a child and a young person, thinking about these ideas. We had this mythology that the problem that Indigenous people had couldn't be fixed with money. That was what I used to always say, oh, it can't be fixed with money. But can't it? It's a lot of money. And why aren't we holding them accountable and saying, well, we've given you all this money. Why have you not helped these people improve their health outcomes? I mean, if we put a basic corporate model on that and said, let's look at your KPIs on this stuff and the way you've fucked over these people for hundreds of years, and they're still in this, they still have these terrible health outcomes, and you've been given these massive big buckets of money and you've done fuck all. Why can't we say that? It's a similar kind of thing for me. That's like, well, why don't we look at the data? Why don't we try and think of a way to help these people? And I think government love these other solutions. It's going to be solved when you poor bastards finally accept that that transgender is a thing.
Yeah. And it's so tantalizing, isn't it, that, there's something that we don't have to pay for, we don't have to measure, that what we need to do is we need to listen. All we need to do is we need to listen, and we just need to, let the child lead.
And bully the working classes, or bully the administrative classes.
That's right.
Into submission.
And I'll just say as well that the fact is that studies like this are so damaging, because what they've done, the way that they have interpreted these results, right, what they've done is they've put gender first. And there are children out there who are actually desperately suicidal. They have multiple mental health issues. And the moment they are seen by a gender clinic, normal mental health services won't touch them. At the moment that there is a gender involvement, they can no longer access regular mental health. services that are meant for children, that are actually
Jillian's
funded.
saying, right?
Yeah. This is, so I'm not saying that this is a blanket rule across Australia. I'll be really clear about that. But there are cases where children in deep distress have gone to a children's mental health clinic, and because they're being seen by the gender clinic and there's a gender dimension to their distress, the children's mental health service will not see them. And the gender service are often not equipped to deal with all of the other attendant issues like autism, like depression, anxiety, eating disorders, PTSD, sexual abuse, physical abuse, bullying, because the gender clinics believe that as long as you nurture the gendered soul, then all of these attended problems will somehow dissolve.
Yeah.
And I don't see how that's possible, because if you have all of these issues, you actually need to get therapy for not just the gender dysphoria, but for the eating disorders and the self-harm and the anxiety and learning how to live with autism. And you actually need all the help for all of those things, not whereas it's a cheaper solution. It's a much cheaper solution from a healthcare provision point of view, because all they need to do is to funnel you into medicalization and transition and not provide hours and hours and hours and hours of expensive talking therapy.
And strategies. I know one of my children was on the spectrum, and they give you a bit of, only mildly on the spectrum, but they give the school a little bit of extra funding to provide they give them a bit of extra time in the exam. They learn in a different way. It's not that they're unintelligent. We understand this. They have a different way of learning. And so they're able to access that specialist information where the school can get a psychologist on board and say, look, this is how this kid learns. So if you want to, you don't have to restructure the whole classroom. And we're all told that, right? We're all told, no, your child's not that special. We're not going to restructure the whole learning. But they find ways to help them,
That if they're trans, we're going to restructure everything.
That's right. We're going to blame all the other kids.
Yeah.
That's the same and that's why I bring my working class, stuff out, because the problem becomes the fault of the population. It's your fault that these kids are committing suicide. You're not submitting to this thing that we say, therefore it's your fault. So it's deeply cynical from my perspective.
It really is. Like, anyone who would weaponize suicide, anyone who would take a child who's in deep distress and tell their parents that unless they complied, then they would kill themselves. Sorry, but you're a bad person. You are a bad person. I can't sugarcoat that one. I sugarcoat a lot of stuff, but it's the wrong thing to do. To give the child a solution, and that solution is A, thinking about suicide, B, talking about suicide, and C, possibly even planning to commit suicide. But
and manipulating your parents with that.
It underestimates.
It's not their fault. They're kids.
It underestimates the effect that has on parents.
I know that program that what's that kid brought that movie out? Was it called 10 Reasons or 12 Reasons or those Disney kids?
Oh yeah, I never saw that one.
I didn't see it. I wouldn't watch it. My kids watched it, and they told me about it. I said, I don't think that's good. I don't think you should watch it. And later they said that they felt that suicide was being glamorized when they were teenagers, that was being, because I knew the cost, I after my cousin committed suicide, it destroyed our family. We never met for Christmas again together. We never, my sister said to me, I used to work at Woolworths at the time, and she said, don't tell them he committed suicide. And I remember thinking, what can I tell them? And I had this secret all of a sudden. So I was not only devastated, but then I had this secret to keep, and I didn't know why. And I remember sitting in the locker rooms at Woolworths and crying. And one of my friends said, "What's wrong?" I said, "He committed suicide and he was gay." And I don't know why I connected those things, but I did. And I didn't know why I couldn't talk about it. And, she never spoke to me again, that woman. She pretended that it never happened. And it wasn't that I wanted to be manipulative. It's just that I was 16. I broke down, 17, broke down crying because I just couldn't carry the grief. I was at the checkout,
Oh,
it was just too much. It really fucks up families. It's a really, and so it's a terrible thing to threaten people with. It's really, and kids do threaten their parents with it, but it's not their fault because they're kids. It's your fault for giving it to children to threaten their parents with. These people, it's a really bad thing to do, and they should not do it. And even I saw Glenna was talking about the other day that the Samaritans in the UK used to say, "Don't do it." And
don't talk about it. Yeah.
Don't weaponize it. And I remember, when I first started studying this, we have changed the analysis. They did that with sexual assault because I started studying that more a few years ago. And they used to say that opportunity was a big factor in sexual assault, and they don't say that anymore. They don't mention it because they don't
want to give people the idea.
Well, it's such an innocuous thing. It's a basic safety. It's a protection. It's something we can fix. You're right. Opportunity. So if you're inviting men into women's spaces, you're giving them opportunity, which is the biggest risk factor in sexual assault. So since the trans issue has risen, they've taken that off the table because they know that we can say, well, actually, opportunity, because they say trans people are not a danger to you. Well, actually, men are the greatest risk and opportunity is the greatest factor. Once you put those things together, it really damages the narrative. So we're changing the way we look at statistics, and we're changing the things we can say that are true. You got another chart, love?
I've always got another chart.
You
know me. I love a good chart. So I've pulled out the Australian Bureau of Statistics on death by suicide for Australian children aged 5 to 17. And again, every single one of these is a life, and every single one is a tragedy.
Yeah.
But what I want to just pull out here, so this is actually children who complete suicide. So this is not attempted, and this is not thoughts of suicide. This is children who have completed suicide. And the important thing here to note about the trend is one that males lead females. So there are about 50% more males who are completing suicide than females. The numbers here are quite steady. So the male rate is around the 60 to 70 per year, and the female rate is around the 30 to 40 per year.
Still a lot, isn't it?
It's a huge number, in Australia, and each of these is a devastated family that we have to really kind of consider that. But what we're not seeing here, so the narrative around the trans suicide is that there have always been trans kids. Once upon a time, they were not free to be themselves. And now there are so many more trans kids because they are free to be themselves. And if you don't let them be themselves, they will kill themselves. So the natural question is, back before 2009, back before OzPath was established, back before Jazz Jennings, back before Georgie Stone, back before all of those people made it okay to be trans in Australia, there must have been trans children born with a gendered soul, who were not free to be themselves and who were not treated with the sensitivities that they're now suggesting. And by their own logic, those children must have been committing suicide, right? Because we know that that is what happens to trans children if they're not treated
Affirmed.
in this particular way, if they're not affirmed. So if we look at the actual data that's out there, this is not happening. You know, there is this sustained number of tragic deaths that are occurring every year, and there is no dent. There's no wonderful dip in that number because we're now affirming trans kids.
Yeah,
we haven't prevented suicides by affirming trans kids.
What we want to see instinctively if this is a race, we want to see socio-economic profile. Yeah,
we do.
That's instinctively what I would want to see. I'd want to see where they're from, what other social problems can we address, which would be hugely expensive, but it'd be worthwhile to drag kids out of poverty, to address systemic problems which put Indigenous families in poverty or migrant families in poverty. My suspicion would be that there would be not as many migrant families, but as I get older, I become more class conscious. I don't know why. Back to my youth, because I think poverty is a massive issue.
We have, like, ABS is looking at this data. They're not classifying trans, non-trans. This is just raw numbers in the age bracket that we're talking about. If we have the longitudinal data to study this, and we should be able to go along and we see a huge number of tragedies, and then we should be able to see when we made a cultural change that number dropped right off.
Yeah.
Because we're now following the rules that we've been told will reduce the suicides.
Yeah, of course I'd say it's our fault because we're not affirming.
So but we're not seeing that data. We're not seeing it. It's not there. Now, I do have another study that I have. I haven't given you a graph for, but
that's a shame.
But yeah, so in late last year, in October 2022, the Coroner's Court of Victoria released a study of suicide among LGBTIQ+ people in Victoria. And there are some useful tables. They do, there is a table showing suicide completion by age, and it goes back to 2012. Now, if we're looking at the under 18 bracket, it's a very, very, very low number of under 18s who are identified as LGBTIQ+, who had been able to complete suicide. And, the largest numbers are consistently in the 18 to 34 bracket. So one of the and what we're actually see, they do a comparison of LGBTIQ+ people versus all suicides, and the bigger cohort in LGBTIQ+ tops out at the 44-year age bracket, whereas in all suicides, it actually the bigger numbers are in the older age brackets.
So that's particularly have a high suicide rate, don't they?
Yeah,
and with women, it's generally middle age when those hormones.
Men over 80 are our biggest cohort of suicides, and that's again,
that could be just considered to be, well, I've done my thing, I'm opting out.
Maybe their partner has died, or it's
generally less of a tragedy than a child, certainly.
Um,
Although, you know, I'm sure it's shocking for people.
The slightly insane thing about this coroner's court report, though, is that, I mean, it does talk about applying an intersectional lens and talk about lived experience, etc. But the insane thing about this is that it doesn't disaggregate by sex, by sexuality, or by transgender or intersex status. So it simply lumps all LGBTIQ plus individuals together in one big category, which is not an intersectional approach, I would say. An intersectional approach would look at females or and then, you know, trans women and race, and it would look at class and all sorts of characteristics. You'd actually get a much richer data set out of an intersectional approach.
Well, we had that study a few years ago. I think I mentioned it in the Northern Territory, where 3 young women had died. And I think it was all suicide, but I could be wrong.
I think it was, yeah. It was,
3 of them have suicide in different
You
occasions.
mentioned that before, yeah.
And Jacinta Price tried to bring that issue to the fore, and no one would talk to her. No one would talk to her, because we can't talk about these issues honestly. Where the ABC, particularly, have to cloud things in what they call intersectionalism, but is not.
Which is not intersectionalism either, is it?
True intersectionalism. The life of those girls intersect with sex, with race, and with class. Those girls are on the bottom
and
of the social order in this country.
Weren't they all sexually abused? Wasn't that
all of them were sexually abused? Yeah, really, like constantly. And one of the things that one of their cousins said is that there's a systemic misogynistic rape culture in some of those communities, and because the ABC didn't want to, they said that was racist, and it's so insane to not address these issues. It's cruelty. I can't. They're so middle class, these concepts, aren't they? You know, they bring them, they sit around in their friggin' tea rooms down at South Bank and talk about intersectionalism and how they're going to free the trans kids and, you know, be all inclusive. But really the realities of this life that some people live, even the life that I lived as a young child, are alien to these people. And I think you said it last week about Dr. Stathis, and it's true. When you said that, I thought about my church and people in that church. You know, it's a Baptist church and people suffer. I'm not saying those people don't suffer. You know, some of those people have children that have taken their lives. Some of those people have horrible things that they face. But it's a very protected middle class world.
Yeah.
You know, it's very white. We have migrant communities, are obviously part of our community. Generally, evangelicals, it's a white pursuit. You know, right? And I'm not blind to that. We don't have to be blind to our own privilege, do we?
No, I don't think so. I
don't think we need to be ashamed of it, to acknowledge that there's problems that statistics bear out that we can face. We're grown-ups. This is a hard one, though. I don't know about facing the fact that children, do we have ages of those children? Do we have an age?
In the Vic coroner's report, they really just, they look at under 18. They really just classify them as, yeah. But yeah, and at the end of, so what we're actually talking about here is we're making the case that children who are privileged enough to spend enough time on TikTok and Facebook, and who probably have a mobile phone and whose parents can afford to medicalize them and to take them to doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists are the most underprivileged group in society, and it absolutely eclipses yeah, I
the reality.
don't know. Yeah.
And I'm not a, you know, I brought my kids up in a pretty privileged
Well,
way. I'm not
can I just
ashamed of
say that's the idea, right?
That's
If
a
you
dream.
grow up a bit poor, if you grow up working class, if you grow up kind of, you know, scraping the bottom of the fridge every Wednesday for something to eat because you haven't been paid, you actually do want to bring your children up not to be in that position. You want to better their lives. You want them to have a better life than what you had. And you want them to be comfortable and to not want. And I'm sorry, I don't fetishize poverty.
No.
And I will not fetishize poverty. I think that's quite sick, actually.
Yeah. I'm trying to make my kids aware. I took them to East Timor and you know, we spent some time in a village with no electricity, and it was traumatic for us all.
Yeah, I imagine.
But it wasn't sort of poverty tourism or anything like that. You know, we had work to do. There was important stuff that I needed to do there, and you know, I just wanted to say to my kids, look, darling, you know, we have given you everything, but that's not, these people are worth exactly the same as you are. There's children that are born in this village, in the eyes of God, are exactly the same value as you. And they have just, in terms of the global economic environment, they have been born, you know, pretty much at the bottom. And that profoundly affects their lives. You know, that all that stuff is being ignored by these fashionable lefties. Abject poverty. And what brings that about?
I think that's one of the things that is quite like ideologically offensive to me about the trans child discourse, is that there are so many people with struggles. And I'm not one of those people who say, oh, it's a white person problem or a third world problem or a first world problem, because, you know, no matter where you are, you'll have problems to overcome. And, you know, just because your problem isn't the worst problem in the world doesn't mean it's not a problem to you. And you should have help with it, right? And everybody should be moving a little bit forward. And everyone should be helping someone else move forward. But we're all worth the same. Like, our lives should all be worth the same. And that's where I really do come down at the end of the day. I think that is a left-wing position, that my life is worth the same as yours. And that if my problems are caused by like a genetic issue, or if my problems are caused by trauma, or if my problems are caused by just me having a really bad personality that I need to learn to live with, I still need the same help as someone who's transgender. And they're not worth more than me, and I'm not worth more than them. Like, it's still the same. But the narrative is that we should give them more help for some reason, that their problems are caused by something special and different, and that their eating disorders are special eating disorders. Their cutting is special cutting. It doesn't
I think from my perspective, I see them, when I saw that the narrative was something that was useful to control populations and ignore massive social problems, I thought, okay, I can see it's not their fault, you know, and they, when I talk about they're not even a real group.
No.
these people, especially when in self-ID, and I'm now in a state with self-ID, so I'm talking about the legal definition of what these people are, who is just, so what you're doing is you're lumping someone like my old schoolmate who couldn't come to terms with who was very homosexual and had a society that pushed that to the margins. You're lumping him in with a bloke who likes a bit of frilly knickers on the weekend. And I don't care if a guy likes a bit of frilly knickers on the weekend, but this is not a people group. This is not a people group in the way that Indigenous people are a people group. And even Indigenous people, there's margins, right? There's different kinds. And even when I was at uni, that was difficult to define. It's not the same thing. These are a governmentally invented and defined group of people that exploit the weaknesses, particularly of homosexual men and the gender non-conforming boy, to make a narrative that is useful to them. It's only useful to Teddy Cook and Akon. They're not helping anybody. They're hurting people because they're teaching children to weaponize this nonsense against their parents. And parents are extremely vulnerable. If you've had a child who expresses suicide thoughts, it's terrifying. It sort of terrifies you to the point of almost you don't know what to do. You're placed in a position where you are extremely vulnerable. And when someone says, this is what you need to do, even if it's wrong, you're very vulnerable. That's why I never blame these parents. I mean, sometimes I do.
No.
If they're like Jazz Jennings' mother, oh my God.
There are some of the parents that we do need to blame, but we're just, we're talking about the parents who are told the narrative here.
Yeah, they don't know any different.
So, they don't.
Sometimes they do, and they're stuck, which is what Jillian has said as well, is that these kids get stuck, that she's stuck as a psychiatrist. She said, I don't want to be in a position to harm other people's children. And then the parents are stuck because they're in a system that's taken on this ideology.
Well, actually, if you look at the detransition message boards, there are people who message on there and they say, oh, I was identifying as trans and I told everyone I would kill myself and I really believed it and da-da-da-da-da. And now my parents are really on board with me being trans and I don't want to tell them now that I don't want to be trans anymore.
Yeah.
Because they'll be so upset and disappointed.
And you feel like, and they feel shame as well. You hear the detransitioners.
They're kids and they change their mind.
Yeah.
But they
feel embarrassed.
Remodeled their entire lives.
Bodies.
Yeah. All right. So
yeah.
That was a very difficult topic. And let's on to sunnier shores now.
Yeah, let's leave it behind with and just with that warning as well. We'll put some resources at the end.
Yeah.
Content warning. When we do take this seriously. We know people are triggered. We know this emotional. Just in our pre-talk, I was having a few tears.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Life's a fucking hard thing to do. And when you've lived a certain amount of life, people that have taken this way out. And it's tough. Or you might have, given it a go yourself. It's not an easy topic. So let's go back to talking about people who we don't like.
We're on firmer territory here, firmer ground.
Talk about the E-Safety Commissioner.
So we've got a little story about our friend, Julie Inman Grant, the E-Safety Commissioner here. Do you want to
who's never on our lips without a scowl. They're taking on Elon. I don't think the press release says this. It might. I don't think I've read it in as much detail as I should have. But she's threatening to sue to fine him something like $700,000 a day, and unless he comes and bows down before her. That's my interpretation of it. And yeah, so the thing is, the press release eSafety demands answers from Twitter about how it's tackling online hate. eSafety received more complaints about online hate on Twitter in the past 12 months than any other platform, and it has received increasing number of reports of serious online abuse since Elon Musk take over the company in October 22. The rising complaints also coincides with the slashing of Twitter's global workforce from 8,000 employees to 1,500, including its trust and safety teams, coupled with ending its public policy presence in Australia. So we've got rid of all the diversity, equity and diversity people at Twitter.
Yeah.
And the elite are not very happy. eSafety Commissioner Julie Grant said Twitter's terms of use and policies currently prohibit hateful conduct on the platform, but rising complaints to eSafety and reports of the content remaining publicly visible on the platform show that Twitter is not likely to be enforcing its own rules. We've seen this issue. Let me just
sure.
one of the things, a couple of things that I found of interest here is the link to Nazis. You know, no one likes a Nazi.
No.
We're also aware of the reports that the reinstatement of some of these previously banned accounts, like mine, I had reinstated, has emboldened extreme polarizers, peddlers of outrage and hate.
But they've linked you to Andrew Tate. Apparently, they brought Andrew Tate back. As well.
Both in Australia and overseas. And you know, the funny thing about Andrew Tate is that he's a gender borg person.
Oh, is he?
Isn't he? He likes it. Remember, he had that video once.
Oh, he did actually. He had a video about respecting
he's a bit of a chaser,
trans people. I think.
Yeah, and that you've got to accept, because he's a misogynist. This is a very easy thing for misogynists to accept. Why wouldn't they be women? You know, your masculine was suggesting that you're not man enough to accept a trans woman in your bed.
So I love how they've linked the return of your account to Andrew Tate, which is hilarious
me and
to me.
Well, they're calling us Nazis anyways, aren't they?
Just look out for the Edie and Andrew show coming up.
Can you imagine it?
It would last about 30 seconds.
It probably wouldn't last very long, especially with my temper. I mean, he's just a typical gross, you know, can I use misogynist again?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of another word, but my flu is probably affecting my brain.
And let's see, we've also got, so Julie used to work at Twitter in the assurance area. So she's actually, he's actually axing her, Elon has axed her function from Twitter. So she's a bit upset. But he's gone on record. He's recently said something to the effect of, well, if you're not trying to run like a Stasi surveillance unit, you actually don't need that many people to staff Twitter. And in terms of combating safety online, Elon has just also made an announcement that cis is going to be treated as hate speech. I think
he's clarified that he's not terribly serious. He means if you target someone, continuously calling them you're cis, and if you say, well, I'm not cis, and they continue to insist that you are, then they'll get deboosted, he said. So he's scaled it back a bit.
Oh, that's good. I mean, so he's actually identified a problem that Julie Inman-Grant has not identified with the platform, which is that there's bullying of quote unquote cisgender women who want to have a say.
Yeah.
And he said, no, you're not allowed to use this term as a term of abuse. Yeah. So
we do object to it, don't we, really?
Yeah.
I don't care. I mean, I don't know what you feel like with Twitter, but since Elon's taken over, I mean, I've enjoyed my experience because I got my account back, but I did have another account while I was off. I feel like there is a little bit more right wingers come back on, and I did try out what's it called, the other one, the right wing one, Getter. Yeah, and that is too. I couldn't negotiate that properly. It is too many the other way for me.
Yeah,
I found that I wasn't comfortable. So, and I call these people middle class, and maybe I am a bit middle class as well, in a sense. I think that's not necessary to say, but you know, Twitter's got these functions where you can block people, where you can mute them. I use those functions. I find them very helpful. People do go from 0 to 100, and that's okay because you can identify them. If someone comes in and says, and I do get a bit of people, homophobes come in and they'll say, oh, it's all the gays. And I'll defend them to the point where I'll say, look, you don't understand the issue, but if they keep going, I block them, I mute them, I get rid of them. I've blocked them from my Substack.
If you don't like what someone has to say, then in the real world, right? If you don't like what someone has to say, you stop going to their house for dinner. You stop ringing them up and asking them what they think about things. Or if, you know, they come into the tea room at work and they start banging on about something, you say, hey, mate, I don't really appreciate that. And if they keep going, you don't go into the tea room at the same time as them.
Yeah.
That's
you might make a complaint. If it's misogynistic, this is the thing of what's a real thing taken to the wrong extent. So if someone at work comes into the tea room and starts talking about their sexual exploits, you say, look, bloke, enough. If he continues to do it and you can't enjoy your lunch in peace, then you might say to the supervisor, look, Ray's in there every day talking about this other shit. Can we give him a bit of a talking to? So that is a legitimate way to manage a workplace. Yeah. If you're feeling, I don't want to say unsafe, but if you're feeling uncomfortable in a place where you're paid to be, you have to be there, right?
Yeah.
You have to pay your mortgage. So you need to go to that place. I think that's legitimate. But we need to know what the boundaries are. And we know that Julie's she's a gender lover.
She is. And so a couple of other little things. Yes, there's a huge number of complaints of hate speech and cyberbullying and whatnot on Twitter. But we also know that the way that they classify hate speech and cyberbullying is actually very, very, very broad. So we've seen recently that some of we had Jasmine Sussex on, so she had a tweet that was restricted in Australia. Redux had a tweet over it, were threatened and told to take down content. And this was really just people exercising their right to comment on public issues.
Yeah.
And it wasn't cyberbullying, it wasn't hate speech.
No.
It was literally pointing to an article and saying, hey, I think this is delusional, or pointing to behavior and saying, hey, this is not appropriate, this is erasure, or this is invading female boundaries, or this is dangerous for women.
Yeah. And also the episode we had taken down in Australia.
They blocked our episode too. Yep.
Yeah, we only mentioned stuff that was on the public record. So we did mention someone's name, but that person was on the public record. They had identified themselves in the media. So I don't.
Well, it's quite interesting because they had sort of dug themselves a hole where they've gone from if you want to be a private individual, then you just conduct your business. Okay. Yes. They were in the media talking about their behavior and then they didn't so they wrote an article and then they got into the mainstream press. They didn't like the way the mainstream press handled their case, i.e. with balance. And so
they were going to say stunning and brave, and those words weren't used.
They got the e-safety commissioner to take down that article from the mainstream media. It can no longer be found online. And then when they were mentioned again on Twitter, again, material that they've put into the public domain, they've got the E-Safety Commissioner to take it down again. And all the while, these complaints are going in as hate speech, as cyberbullying. I'll just say, we actually don't know that they did order our episode restricted.
No.
We assume it's them, but we don't know. I did
It's only
write to
restricted
them.
in Australia.
I wrote to them to ask, and I've got to say, I was really disappointed that they, in their response, they misgendered me.
Oh,
They did. They called
sexual
me.
violence.
They called me Ms. Kowalski.
Oh.
That I didn't indicate that I identified as a woman or as a Ms. So I
Did
feel
you
like
put pronouns?
I didn't put my pronouns. Like, they should have asked. I think that
They
that's
should have, yeah.
what they should have done. I felt quite offended. If that was in the public domain, it could have been cyberbullying.
Yeah,
Actually,
could have been.
could have been.
Another thing, just to mention from a Liberal perspective too, is that this is a massive issue because in Liberal democracies, freedom of speech is considered a part of a functioning democracy, that a functioning democracy cannot be maintained without freedom of speech. And the only legitimate thing to limit speech is harm. So they should have to really, the onus should be on them to prove the harm. And this is how they're doing it. Self-identified Facebook survey, generated stuff that's being authorized by corrupted doctors. So that's how they're limiting our speech. It's and they're connecting it with Nazis. So they're implying that we're not going to only kill these children, we're going to bring about the Fourth Reich. That's the consequence of how they're limiting our speech. That's the justification, because they have to have the harm principle is the only thing they can limit our speech with, and so that's what they're trying to do. It used to be incitement. Incitement used to be the line where you'd get up there and say, "Oh, these blokes are terrible. Go and beat them up." But now it's.
Well, actually, one of the definitions of cyberbullying is to incite pile-on comments. So it's not just to be critical or mean to somebody. It's actually to incite. I don't really know how you do that, but incite other people to also be mean and critical.
Which is what trans activists do. Comments. That's their stock and trade.
Yeah.
That's how they get organizations to submit to them.
Occasionally you'll get like a trans activist like commenting on one of your posts, and it feels a bit like you've got ants in your picnic, because there'll be one and then there'll be another one and there'll be another one, and you're kind of blocking them all, and they're just annoying you.
Yeah, flying monkeys. And it used to be worse though.
Yeah, but so
that's what they want. They want that situation where they can control the narrative. Yeah, the thing when gender critical women started to get a little group, the red squares started to come up, and the suffragette flags that we see, we did start to be able to ratio organizations, and I think that really matters. We started to fight fire with fire. It's not like we'd invented this. We were noticing all of these trans activists were coming up and making it look like everyone agreed. And so we started to make a coordinated effort to ratio people, which we do, and show our objections to things. And that's why they start turning off comments and calling it hate. It's a political strategy.
I know. I mean, there's a part of this where people would say, "Oh, it's just Twitter. It doesn't matter. It's just Twitter." But the fact is that companies, and that includes our government agencies, they have social media. And they go on social media and they look at how posts perform. They have social media strategies. They have content strategies. They'll say, right, we're going to put out a post for Pride Week. We're going to put out a post about breastfeeding. We're going to put out a post about Save the Trees. And then they'll look and they'll say, we got 10 likes for this one. We got 100 likes for this one. And we got 2,000 likes for this one. Okay, this is what we're going to do more of. They actually do pay attention to it. So it is a way of doing that political action. Yeah.
They put a lot of money into it, right? Daniel Andrew
They do.
and Anastasia Palaszczuk are both known for putting massive millions and millions of dollars into these social media strategies.
Yeah.
And so it's very legitimate for us to get online and push back against them. It's difficult on Facebook because they just delete them. I'm not a Facebook. I have a Facebook thing. I don't use it very much. I put my stuff up there. I engage in some debate. Sometimes the skinheads come and pick on me. It's because you can delete comments, right? You can delete comments, and so it looks like you go to Phantom and my girlfriend's Facebook page, and it's all love. You go to a Twitter, it's a little bit different.
It's a little bit different, yeah.
Because you can't delete. You can hide the comments, but then we go to the hidden comments, and we all have a bloody laugh because these things are deeply unpopular. People don't believe. Ultimately, people don't like to be bullied, and they don't believe this stuff. I'm kind of dying on the hill.
So, if we go sort of full circle, we have ACON, our trainer, Nikki Elkin, saying, we have these awful statistics, and here's what you can do about it. You can just stop being a bully and use people's names. Don't be a dirty turf. Just use people's names and it will prevent all this suicide.
Yeah.
Well, and now we have the force of the law, Jillian Grant, e-safety commissioner, going to fine Twitter. And I think I read somewhere that if employees of Twitter come to Australia, she'll fine them on the spot. Like, it's crazy. It sounds crazy.
It is crazy. Sort of these middle-class women,
She's not used to hearing no, is she?
No. What her comment here is, we need accountability from these platforms and action to protect their users. And you cannot, some users obviously, not us, and you cannot have accountability without transparency. And that's what legal notices like this one are designed to achieve.
And I mean, I actually find since Elon's taken over, it's been much more transparent. I felt much safer. I don't feel like I have to worry about what I'm going to tweet. And, I mean, Elon just has a stream of consciousness kind of going on. He just tweets what he thinks. So,
which is what Twitter's for, really.
But it feels quite transparent to me.
People would say to us, you just want to be able to hate on trans people.
Not really.
You can read I do openly misgender people because that's a political decision. But I, genuinely wish no harm on these people. And I'm the last person in the world that would want to do anything that leads a gender non-conforming person to take their own life. And that is the truth. And that's why they don't like me. That's why I'm dangerous, is because I won't conform. I won't be bullied. And I won't have them put the blood of these children on my hands because it's their fault. It's their fault that we have this rise in kids who are uncomfortable with, I don't know whether they're committing suicide. I don't think it's even appropriate to talk about.
No.
I know that they're uncomfortable, and I know that they're going to gender clinics, and I know they're getting inappropriate care. So, and I think that's their fault. I think that the way that they promote this gender ideology is dangerous and it's damaging to people. And I'm not going to stop saying that. That's, Julie can stick it up her ass. I'm not. I know. Sorry, her name's not Julie, is it? Yeah, it is Julie. Isn't it?
Julie. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Julie.
Well, you know,
Sorry, Jules, but we're not
Yeah.
going to play ball.
we're not doing it, and we will die on this hill. I will go to prison, which is what they want. They want people like us to be criminally responsible. They want the police who we commission to look after the people to come after us. You don't know. I'm not going to allow that. If that happens, I'm not going to go quietly. None of us will. We're going to highlight every incident of women, like those women at Parliament House who stood up, and they're all being censured. They're all being disciplined because of this. We're on their side. Piss off.
Yeah.
And Elon, I don't think Elon's the savior of the world. I don't agree with everything he says.
No, he's not. He's,
but he's done good with some things.
He's done some good work. Done a good job with some things. I don't believe in saviors.
No, I do have one.
Well, you do, yeah. But he's not here, and he doesn't have a Twitter account, does he?
Jesus, no, I don't think so. No, he doesn't have a Twitter account. He probably does have several, but people claiming to be Jesus. And I've been watching a lot of the things lately, the cults and stuff like that. And they're interesting. The people who do have, who do look for saviors. Very vulnerable people look for saviors.
Yeah. Well, shall we leave it there?
Yeah, we might put my voice out of its misery.
Thank you for joining us in the Dollhouse. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. We are on YouTube, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and our show notes are on Substack every week. I'm Kit Kowalski, and I'm here with Edie Wyatt. We will be back next week with more news and views in the Aussie genderverse.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks. See ya.